Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Mimosa Fridays podcast, a show where we share powerful life lessons and a few laughs as Gail empowers others as she sits at the intersection of people, purpose, and politics while sipping on mimosas. Now grab some orange juice and champagne and welcome your host, Gail Dudley.
I can't wait to talk about Sarah. Y'all, Sarah is a writing friend of mine. We've met through a writing club, organization, private club, whatever you want to call it. But she is amazing. She is amazing. I took to her early on, knowing her beliefs and what she does and how she interacts. She's married. She has two amazing children. Sarah is navigating faith, justice, and culture. Again, share this video. She was born and raised a Southern girl. She grew up eating grits, playing basketball, and going to church. For many years, she has really just consumed Starbucks Frappuccinos. I know y'all got some Starbucks people on here. She completed her master's degree. Her first book is Love Undocumented, Risking Trust in a Fearful World, and that was published in January 2018. Her writing on immigration, cross-cultural life, and faith has been featured in Christianity Today, Relevant, Sojourners, churchleaders.com, Off the Page, and elsewhere. She's the bomb.com. She really is. She is married to Billy from Guatemala City, where they met and married in Los Angeles. Together, they walked through the complex U.S. immigration system and delightfully enjoyed the humor and the craziness of a cross-cultural bilingual relationship. Say that real fast. They live in Atlanta, Georgia, where they're trying to be good neighbors and friends. Just so much is going on with her. She knows what she's talking about. So again, share the video, get your information. I'm going to bring her on screen. We're going to laugh a little bit, but I'm going to go off screen and let her have her time to share with all of you. So boom, there you are.
Good morning, Gail. Hi.
Hi, how are you, Sarah?
I'm doing well. It's nice to see you and happy birthday, belated.
Thank you. I'm still partying to the end of the month.
Well, tomorrow's my birthday, so you have to divide it in half.
Well, we'll have to do that. I didn't even know that. Great. Well, thank you. With everything going on with DACA, I was like, who can help us here? And I was like, boom, Sarah. So I reached out to you and we made it work. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hey, I'm going to do a lead-in question. And then I'm going to give it to you. You saw some of the questions I sent you yesterday in the email. And I guess my first question is, what is DACA? What can we do? How can we become a voice for people? Just give us what you can in the short time that we have. But I'm just so open. The people are so open for your information. People want to know how to write to their legislators. They want to know what to do. They want to know how to vote. They want to have the truth and not all the lies and the different spins that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, your community had some great questions, and I'm so glad to see people talking about it because it needs us to talk about it, and it needs public support. Absolutely. So
yeah. Well, take it away. I'm removing myself. I'll come back in a little while.
Okay. Here's where things can get crazy. Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in, and thank you for your questions about DACA. I feel like DACA is one of these acronyms that we just hear from time to time. It comes up in the news. We hear it used sometimes interchangeably with things like Dreamers or the DREAM Act. So I want to give just a little bit of context so that we know where did this come from and who exactly are Dreamers and what is DACA, kind of to Gail's question. In the short answer is that Dreamers are immigrants who were brought to the United States as children by their parents or legal guardian. The reason that name Dreamers came about was actually because it started in 2001. And so it was in 2001 that there was a bipartisan legislation called the DREAM Act, and that stood for Development, Relief, and Education of Alien Minors. And so that's where the DREAM Act came about in 2001. It had strong bipartisan support, but it did not pass. And so you had a population of people who had been brought to the United States as children. You had Congress putting forth legislation to create some kind of pathway for these children to adjust their status. And maybe that's the, even one place to start is that how did kids in this situation become undocumented? And sometimes that's because their parents crossed the border with them as children. Sometimes it's because they came on legal visas and those expired. There's lots of stories of situations where everyone else in the family was able to get status, and then for some reason this one child wasn't able to. Or sometimes you have parents who separated during that time and the immigration status was attached to the parent that then was no longer part of the family, and how that impacted kids' statuses. And then they found themselves in this situation where they're 3 months old, 7 years old, 17 years old, and they don't have immigration status. And some children don't even know this usually sometimes until they start applying for college. And then they have a parent has to have a hard conversation with them of that's not an opportunity that's open to you. So in 2001, we had this bipartisan legislation come up. DREAM Act did not pass. We have had variations of that legislation come in and out of Congress ever since 2001, every couple years. I think right now there's a DREAM Act 2021 that was brought up by Senator Durbin from Illinois and Senator Graham from South Carolina just this past February. We have the Dream and Promise Act. There's even conversations now about DREAM Acts. Every time some version of the DREAM Act comes to Congress, it always has bipartisan support, and it almost always has strong public support. And yet it has never passed. And so you think about, and this is the context that I think is really important, because a lot of times when we talk about DREAM Act, we're all thinking still about these 11-year-old kids who were brought by their parents who don't have status. But because this started in 2001, the oldest dreamers just turned 40 last month. And so the reason that, or the oldest DACA recipients, and this is where I'm going to get to DACA. So in 2012, so what is 2012 minus 2001? So 11 years after the DREAM Act had initially been introduced, President Obama, by executive order, created DACA. And DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. I want to be very clear. DACA provides no pathway to legal residence, no pathway to citizenship. DACA was a temporary Band-Aid that said, we will defer action. We will postpone deporting you. We will not deport you while we figure out a permanent solution. So the DREAM Act's been bouncing around for 11 years now. And so President Obama said, that is extremely stressful for this population of people. So therefore, by executive order, he created DACA, which said they can't be deported while we're figuring out a solution. It also offered some other really valuable benefits to this population in that they were able to get Social Security numbers, driver's licenses, go to college, and work. So that was a really big deal for folks who had been waiting, particularly since 2001. And again, so I am 1 month shy of being the oldest possible dreamer out there that could apply for DACA at that time. So you're looking at, I was 2 years out of high school when the DREAM Act is first introduced. Now in 2012, I'm finally able to get a driver's license. I'm finally able to work, to go to college. This was a really big deal for people who were able to apply for DACA. And there was a lot of stress even around that application process, because for many immigrant families, you're admitting that your parents, you're signing up for a government program saying, I'm undocumented. Very possibly my parents are also undocumented. So there was a lot of vulnerability even about applying for DACA and saying, I want to take advantage of this opportunity, but it was risky. It was very, very risky. And we'll see why in a minute. And so again, DACA was a temporary thing. It has to be renewed every 2 years. It is not an ongoing thing that you apply for once. It has to be renewed every 2 years. And it was simply a Band-Aid. Like I said, no permanent status was available to DACA recipients. And they were also not eligible for things like federal financial aid. So you could go to college, but you had to pay for it on your own and all of these things. So there was pros and cons, but it was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, a temporary fix. And so that has been renewing every 2 years for folks since 2012. This is not something that addressed a large group of people. I mean, it's large in the sense that it's about 650 to 800,000 people. But in the immigration conversation at large, this was a very narrow solution for a very targeted population. But it's an important one. And so how do you qualify for DACA? At that time in 2012, you had to have been born in June 1981 or after, arrived in the United States before you were 16. So if you arrived when you were 17, it was too late. So you had to have arrived before 16. And you had to have been in the US since June 2007. So there were all these requirements of when you were born, when you came, and how long you'd been here to qualify for DACA. So again, just to clarify, there was a lot of people who fell outside of that. We've heard stories and connected with people who couldn't get a birth certificate from their home country because of issues going on in that country. So they couldn't prove when they were born, right? And so they couldn't qualify. You have folks who came and then left for a period and came back for whatever reason. And so all of these things, again, it was a narrow solution for a targeted population. I can't remember what year, I want to say 2019 or 2020, it must have been 2019, President Trump canceled DACA. So he made a decision that by executive order, he would cancel President Obama's executive order. And so this was very destabilizing to a community who's been in tension and been in unknown, in this kind of unknown limbo for all of this time. All of a sudden there was this idea that it would be canceled and that all of your information had been transferred to the government. So that went through the courts. I want to say it was the same time or even earlier, you had Texas and several states. Basically, since the moment DACA has passed, it's been in court proceedings of people saying it's illegal, this element's illegal, that element's illegal. And so it's been battling in courts, kind of going up and down the chain of the court system ever since it's been passed. And the Supreme Court last year, summer of 2020, defended DACA and said that it was not allowed, that the Trump administration could cancel DACA outright. And so that was a big win for the Dreamer community. It relieved some stress. But then we saw this week that the case of Texas and the states, that has been still bouncing around in the courts as well. And we had a federal judge on Friday say DACA is an overstep and an overreach and is illegal. And so it's been a lot. It's been a lot of back and forth. It has been a lot of kind of figuring out how do we manage this tension. And again, I just want to stress, this has been going on since 2012. These are individuals who are in their 30s. They own homes, they have careers. Because they've had this temporary status, they have been able to build a life, but there is always this undercurrent that it could be taken away at any moment because every 2 years they're having to renew this process. And so the court ruling on Friday has put into jeopardy anyone who has currently submitted their application but has not yet been accepted. So that's about 80,000 applicants who have applied for DACA but not yet been accepted. There's about 650,000 DACA recipients who already have DACA who in the short term are not impacted by this ruling. They are still protected. They are able to keep their DACA status, and it currently says they can still renew it, but that could change. And so I just want to really reiterate the influx and the instability that DACA has unintentionally created because this whole situation has just been so unstable. And so we need a permanent solution from Congress. That is the only way to protect Dreamers permanently. Our Congress has to pass legislation that says this is the pathway for those individuals to be able to have residence. And so that is my biggest call to action, is to call your lawmakers and say, we need a permanent solution for Dreamers. You don't have to tell them what to do, how to do it, any of those things. They are not looking to you to write the legislation. They need a ruckus to know that this is important. And we want you to do your jobs to make sure that this legislation gets passed so that people can stop living in this kind of stress and can become full participating members in the society that they call home, that many have been here their whole entire lives, depending on when they were brought. So
wow.
You hopped on, so that makes me think I should stop talking.
No. I came on here. There's one question that Kenya is asking. She said, I don't know if you see it on your screen, with the previous occupant, we don't call his name, in the office who divided families. I'm trying to read it myself. What is the status of those families? Do we know the status of those families? And what can we do as citizens as well? So do you know the status of, I know you went to the border, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you went to the border. So what can we do? That's what she's asking. Are those families back together? I believe some of them were reunited, if I remember.
Some of them are. I mean, there have been folks working on that pretty much since it was rescinded. I mean, family separation is a complicated thing at the border. It has been happening for a long time, and in that particular season, it was happening with sort of an extremity we hadn't seen before. When President Biden was inaugurated, he created a task force specifically focused on reuniting some of those families. I think it has been slow going. I think they have, kind of announced maybe 7 of those families have been reunited. There's several hundred that are still separated from. A lot were reunited very quickly after that happened, but you had situations where an infant might be taken from their parents. And so now that infant is maybe 2 years old and can't provide, there was no system in place to track who went with who. And so it's been, and then you also had situations where parents were deported back to potentially rural parts of Guatemala and El Salvador. So having to track families down has required a lot of coalition and cooperativeness across countries and trying to find families. And you also have families who are in the just sort of horrible situation of having to choose, do I let my child go through the U.S. foster care system rather than coming back to a place where I feel they are unsafe? And so you have parents in that terrible tension as well.
Wow. You said something, just to hear you, I know I've followed you for a long time now, and I've heard all of this before, but for some reason it's hitting me differently today. You said something, and I think it was Kimberly Graves said every 2 years create unnecessary anxiety. So with that being said, let's say they do get deported. So let's say they had children during that time. Well, the children will be allowed to stay, but where? And what happens? We've seen so many, I've seen so many videos of parents being separated at the airport because they're being deported, but the children are staying. What can we do? I know you said to call our legislation, but is there anything else we can do?
Mm-hmm. So children of DACA recipients, if they're U.S. citizens, they go into the U.S. foster care system. And so that, there are opportunities for fostering. There's opportunities right now for fostering migrant children at the border. And so while that's a totally different situation, we hear a lot about unaccompanied minors at the border, but unaccompanied doesn't mean alone. We have very narrow definitions for children who arrive at the border. If they are not with a biological parent or someone who can prove legal guardianship, they are separated. So if they come with a grandmother or an auntie or an older cousin, they are separated from that person and they are classified as an unaccompanied minor. So like 80% of the children who are arriving at the border currently have a relative in the United States. So there's an opportunity for really temporary foster care while agencies are tracking down families, vetting them, and reuniting those kids with their U.S.-based relatives. Wow. Bethany Christian Services does a lot in several states with placing kids with temporary foster care. It's usually 1 to 3 months because they're because they have someone to go to. It's just a matter of getting everything in order.
Okay, I have 2 more questions, y'all. We're going to do these 2 other questions. Where can we find information about adopting those displaced children?
That's a complicated question because the kids have parents. And so, there's a lot of effort on figuring out how do we reunite them with their families. I think any kind of adoption would go through the foster care system of children who are in need of someone to adopt them.
Okay. And then Pastor Alex is asking, now that this vulnerable population has exposed themselves via the DACA process, will ICE automatically come and deport them if DACA is canceled?
I think that was a big concern in previous years. I believe right now the Biden administration has gone back to some of the Obama administration where they're prioritizing, where they have ICE priorities, which is really to focus on people with criminal histories or criminal activities, to focus their efforts on that rather than searching people out who may or may not have status. And so, but I'm just going to say, if we pass something permanent, then I don't have to worry about it. so
how do we, and I got 1,000 more questions, but we're at time, but I have to ask this question. How can we get some vote on the that we vote for a piece of legislation as constituents? How can we bring more awareness to this? You're doing your work. I know you have a team of people doing the work with you, and people are hearing different things, but there's so much misinformation out there. What can we do? What's like is there a written narrative that we all need to learn and make sure we're speaking the same language?
That's a great question. And the book Immigration Made Easy is over 600 pages. And so this is, there's a really nuanced, complicated topic. I think for kind of what we're talking about today, I would say for DACA, the message is we need a permanent solution. We need our legislators. My sense of what keeps happening politically is that because DACA has bipartisan support, everyone tries to throw in other things to those legislation. And then
that's the pork, right?
Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, can we just pass this by itself? Because everyone agrees on this. So let's pass it. And then I would say with asylum seekers and migrants at the border, the biggest narrative I hear that is not true is, well, they're here illegally. And seeking asylum is legal. Seeking asylum is a legal process. And so they are going through our legal process. Is it stretched right now? Absolutely. And so how do we address that with additional lawyers, with reasonable centers to house children and all of that? And right now we have governors saying, well, we won't take any migrant kids in our foster care systems. Well, then of course people are in encampments and different things because governors are shutting it down. So how do we actually solve the problem rather than pushing our political agendas and recognize that these are people, real people in desperate situations, and do our best to address that? Not everyone who's coming will qualify for asylum. It's really difficult to qualify for asylum, but they have a legal right to apply. And unless we're going to change our asylum process, this is the legal process. So let's let people walk through it.
Wow. Okay, I got another question. Y'all, if y'all have to leave to go to work, go ahead. But I got to get these questions out. Here's another question before I get to Nuwana's. There was a question I sent you that talked about, is DACA tied to voting rights, that whole voting rights bill? Is there something that maybe if the voting rights bill is passed, we can get DACA passed, or vice versa? Did you see the two of those bills connected or disconnected?
I wouldn't say they're directly connected. I think, I would say there's probably some concern that if the voting rights bill is passed, that we might see more people sympathetic to Dreamers, possibly. I don't know that that's true. Okay. And then I think, DACA itself, if it did create a pathway to citizenship, would eventually allow past DACA recipients to become citizens and vote. So, but I feel like DACA recipients have felt pretty failed by both political parties. So I don't know that there would be, I don't know that you can predict how people would go with that.
Yeah. Agree. And that kind of feeds into what Nawana asked. She says, so the people that have been in DACA for a while been paying taxes to the government. If so, why not let them stay legally? That's a great question, Nawana.
So yes, they pay taxes because they have legal authority to work. So they are paying taxes, but they are able, but they're not able to vote. They're not able to leave the country without permission. I'm pretty sure they have to have, kind of go through a process for that. So there's a lot of restrictions, but yes, they are paying taxes.
Wow.
Lots of undocumented immigrants pay taxes, billions and billions of dollars.
So. Wow. This is almost like a never ending cycle. And I'm so glad you said you made the statement on both sides. It's like, what are you all doing? We vote you in, and we're just asking you to pay attention to the people. Like Kim Edmondson saying, thank you for making the connection between this issue and voting rights. And then also she says, stop the politics and deal with the people issues. It's just, and there's so many people on here just saying, thank you, Sarah, for bringing this great information. Look, I know we only have so much time, but you're just going to have to come back.
Well, I'll just say one last thing, and that is where many of us feel kind of like, I'm a little confused. I don't exactly know what's going on. My experience, even of going to DC and sitting in offices with aides and representatives, is that they don't always know a whole lot about it either. And I say that with respect, not with disparagement, but there is a lot of things happening in the United States. And so sometimes these niche issues get pushed to the back. It feels niche to them, not to me, but you get pushed to the back burner. And so, I remember sitting across from an aide and saying, when we're restricting refugees, it is crumbling our infrastructure to welcome refugees. This means the refugees who do come will not be integrated in the same way. They will not get the resources and support that they need. And so, and she literally said, I never thought about it like that. And so, and I appreciate that humility, but I think that's where we as citizens have to say, I'm going to get even a little bit informed about this, and I'm going to keep pushing, because there's always things I don't know. There's always new things happening, but there are some things we do know, and there are some things we don't have to find out. We just have to say, we need a permanent solution for Dreamers.
I agree with you. Oh my gosh, I agree with all of that. And that's so key. Last week I was sharing on News in Motion about disinformation and misinformation and the spin, and how we just can't take something and put it out there, how we have to do our research on it. And with all the questions around this, I was like, I know who to contact, so I reached out to you. There's so much more learning we need to do, but I cannot say thank you enough. And Sarah, every day we give a For the Win, and you get the win today.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're up there with LeBron James and with Kamala Harris, so you get the win today. Absolutely, you get the win
I invite
today.
anyone, if you're interested in this stuff. I post a lot about it on Instagram. I'm just at Sarah Casada on Instagram. And as Gail mentioned, I did write a book that is a really good primer if you're new to this issue. It has a love story that you can follow through, but then it also talks about what we learned going through the process and how our story fit into the bigger picture. It's called Love Undocumented. And so it's been a joy to be with your community today. Great questions, great energy. So thank you.
Thank you. Y'all check her out. I will put in the thread, or somebody from the team will put in the thread how to reach out to her. Y'all sign up for her newsletter. And if I get this correct, the newsletter is called Everyday Justice. Is that correct?
It is. Since I've been homeschooling my kids during COVID, I haven't been doing a newsletter as much, but maybe they're going back this fall, so we'll see.
You said they're going back. And next time I come to Atlanta, I have to come hang out with you.
Absolutely. And but we do a newsletter through Women of Welcome, which if you are a Christian woman, that's a great community of talking about these issues as well. You might find a good home there as well. So.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, y'all. The inspirational message is that we need to continue to strive forward to do what God has called us to do in this season. And that may mean that we have to get uncomfortable and do some things we're not used to. But if you're passionate about this information you've heard today, everyone, that means God is calling you to do something. Even having one conversation with someone else will make a difference in the long run. Y'all know what I say. Stay well, everybody. And remember, you must make some moves.
Catch Gail each weekday on News in Motion on Facebook Live at facebook.com/newsinmotion or her YouTube at youtube.com/Gail Dudley. You can also follow Gail on Instagram and Twitter at Gail Dudley and visit her website, www.gaildudley.com. Until next week, as Gail always signs off, stay well and remember to make some moves.